Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Life Sciences by Dumisilani. We are continuing with our lesson series on the endocrine system and homeostasis. On this video, we will be looking at lesson 5, which is specifically on the control of salt levels in the blood, as well as osmoregulation. Okay, now when we talk about osmoregulation, what are we talking about? We are talking about the control of water levels in the blood or control of water levels in the body. When we talk about control of water levels and control of salt levels, guys, remember what we are doing here is homeostasis. Therefore, normal levels, normal levels all good and well. When salt levels and water levels increase above normal, negative feedback kicks in where something must detect the increase in those levels and something must be done to reduce the levels back to normal. Okay. Again, we don't want the levels of salt and water below normal. So when there's a drop in salt levels or a drop in water levels, negative feedback must kick in where something in the body will detect the drop in water levels or salt levels and something must be done to increase the levels back to normal. Okay, now we refer to normal levels of water and salt in the blood. Remember, water and salt are dissolved or dissolve in the blood, and that's how water and salt are transported. Okay, now the organ that regulates the organ that regulates the water levels and salt levels are the kidneys. Okay, so the kidney is the organ that regulates water levels or controls water levels as well as salt levels. Within the kidney, there are structures over there. I'm not sure if you can see it. The structure that I'm highlighting, there are millions of these structures that are called nephrons. Okay? When we magnify that, we can see that, the nephron. Okay? So now, the function of the nephron is to filter the blood. It removes the substances that are too much. Okay. Oh, let me go back here before I go on. So the organ that regulates the water levels and salt levels in the blood are the kidneys. Within the kidneys, there are structures there are structures gosh, I'm so sorry for that. There are structures. Those structures within the kidney that do the specific functions are the nephrons. So the nephrons within the kidney do the function of filtering the blood. Okay? Remember, there are a lot of substances that are dissolved or mixed into the blood. It means when there is too much of these substances such as what? Substances such as salt, substances such as water. Okay, let me just keep it there. When there's too much of these substances, water and salt, as the plasma of the blood passes through the nephron will filter the blood, meaning it will remove the excess of these substances, water and salt, convert it into urine, and then once you urinate, you'll urinate the excess salt and the excess water. Okay, guys? But when there's too little water and salt in the blood or in the body, the nephron will make sure that as it filters blood, it keeps the little water that you have and the little salt that you have and reabsorbs it back to the body, meaning you will lose less water because you already have too little. More water is stored back to the body, more salt is stored back to the body, okay? And the urine that you urinate will contain less water and less salt. But when you have too much water and too much salt, the nephron will take the extra or the excess water and salt, convert it into urine, and more is lost. Okay? Less is kept or reabsorbed back to the body. Okay, guys? Now, I'm going back. The job of the nephron, let me just make sure this is recording. Yes. The job of the nephron is to filter the blood. Okay? Now, let's check. Like I said, when you have too much salt and water, the job of the nephron is to take the excess water and the excess salt, convert it into urine, and then you urinate more. You get rid of more. You excrete, not secrete, excrete. You get rid of the extra water and the extra salt, and then the salt and water levels will decrease back to normal. Okay? So, when you have too much, like I said, salt and water, it means more what is wrong with my iPad today, guys? I don't know what's going on. I am so sorry for that. Okay, let me just write it down there. Sorry for that. I am going back. When water levels and salt levels increase above normal, what is going to happen? The nephron will make sure that more H2O and salt is excreted. Okay, firstly, and less of it is reabsorbed. less is reabsorbed back to the body. Okay, so we keep less and we lose more. So if we lose more, then the levels of salt and water will reduce back to normal because we have lost more by excreting it out. Okay, now when the situation is inverse and water levels drop below normal, meaning we have less than normal, it means what must happen? More, or yes, more H2O and salt is reabsorbed. So because we have less, we keep more, okay? Or we reabsorb more and less is excreted. And then the levels will increase if we keep more and lose less. The levels will increase back to normal. So this is the premise of the function of the nephron in terms of the regulation or the control of water levels and salt levels. If you have too much, we need to reabsorb less and lose more. If we have too little, we need to lose less and keep or reabsorb more. And it is the function of the nephron to do that. Okay. Now, let us go back to lesson 2 on this on this lesson series. Okay. Let us look at the hormones. Just to remind you, the hormone that controls salt levels is aldosterone. It's aldosterone, and it is secreted by a gland that is called the adrenal gland. So on top of both the kidneys, there is a gland on top there, the location of the adrenal gland. On top of both kidneys, we have the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland secretes aldosterone that is involved in the control of blood salt levels. Okay. And the hormone that is responsible for controlling water levels is known as the antidiuretic hormone, abbreviated as ADH. Abbreviated as ADH. Okay. Now, let us move on to the content, and then we will look at how does aldosterone work in controlling blood salt levels, and how does ADH work in controlling blood water levels at normal. Okay. Right, on this slide, we'll be looking at how aldosterone controls salt levels in the blood or in the body. So there is a magnified structure of the nephron. Okay. Now, what happens is that I'm not sure if you can still remember from grade 10 is that blood will come in to the, okay, I don't want to be too much detailed about this because you don't need to know the specifics for grade 12 purposes. Let me just say blood comes into the afferent arteriole and then it's going to constitute there in the glomerulus, okay? And then the blood plasma will be pressured into the nephron like that. Remember that the blood plasma is the water component of the blood that contains dissolved salt and it also contains water. So as the plasma is moving in the nephron, remember, it contains salt. We are specifically talking about salt, okay, or sodium. So it contains salt. All right. Now, the blood plasma will travel. It travels down the nephron, down the loop of Henle, up like that. It travels until it gets to the collecting duct. Okay. Now, whatever reaches the collecting duct, this part over here, will be converted into urine. And we know that urine is a liquid that contains metabolic waste, okay? Whatever gets to the collecting duct will be converted into urine and will be urinated out. So whatever reaches the collecting duct will be converted into waste product and it will be excreted out. So the key is not to reach the collecting duct. Whatever substance that reaches the collecting duct within the filtrate or the blood plasma will be converted into waste, okay, into urine, and it will be excreted. Now, what aldosterone does when there's too little salt, what aldosterone does is that it makes the walls of these tubules, let's for now call them renal tubules of the nephron. As you can see, the nephron is made up of small tubes that we refer to as tubules. What aldosterone does is that it opens channels on the renal tubules. It opens channels on the renal tubules or pathways in the renal tubules to allow salt to pass out, to go out of the nephron, salt. So it moves out of the nephrons through the walls of the renal tubules. Now, when it moves out, when salt moves out of the nephron, it is absorbed by the blood capillaries that are surrounding the nephron, and then the salt levels, the salt is kept back to the blood or reabsorbed back to the blood, or you can say reabsorbed back to the body. So as the filtrate of the blood is moving like that, it loses salt and the salt is reabsorbed back to the body. Okay, so as the filtrate is moving and moving and moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, more and more salt leaves the nephron and then it is absorbed back to the blood or back to the body. And then it loses more and more and more and more and more salt as it moves. And then when it gets to the collecting duct, it will contain less salt. And then we have less salt in the collecting duct, meaning that the urine is going to contain less salt because more salt was reabsorbed. So, let us revise what the function of aldosterone is. So, aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal gland, which is a gland found on top of the kidneys. Function of aldosterone is that it makes the walls of the nephron. Walls of the renal tubules. When you talk about the renal tubules, we are talking about the tubules or the small tubes of the nephron. Permeable to salt. Okay. So, aldosterone is a hormone that makes the walls of the renal tubules to be permeable. Permeable, guys. Permeable. To salt in particular. To salt in particular. Okay, so what do we mean by making the walls of the renal tubules to be permeable? Like I said, it makes the walls of the tubules of the nephron, it opens up channels. It's like little doorways, okay? So that salt can escape back to the body. All right. So when salt escapes back to the blood, it goes back to the body. And then less salt reaches the collecting duct and less salt will be converted into urine or incorporated into urine and less salt will be urinated out. So it means it means that more aldosterone equals more permeability. More aldosterone makes the walls of the renal tubules more permeable to salt. And then when we have more permeability to salt, we have more reabsorption. We have more salt being reabsorbed back to the body, And then when we have more salt reabsorbed back to the body, we have less salt excreted. We have less salt excreted. Okay. Can I just do something very quickly? So sorry, I need to clear this. Okay. Here we have it, nice and clean again. Okay, guys. So if we have less aldosterone, it means we have less permeability Okay, so as the filtrate or the blood plasma passes, like that in the nephron, salt, because we have less channels on the walls of the renal tubule, salt is kept in to the nephron, and the salt does not leave the nephron. Okay, the salt does not leave the nephron. Follow it. It means that more salt will reach the collecting duct, and more salt will be converted into urine, and then the urine will be excreted out containing more salt. So less permeability equals less permeability. Less aldosterone equals less permeability, which equals less reabsorption. Less reabsorption, meaning because these walls of the nephron or the renal tubules are now impermeable, salt cannot leave. So that's what we mean by less permeability. Less salt is reabsorbed back to the body, and then that means more salt is excreted. More salt is excreted. Okay, now if we reabsorb less salt, we lose more, or we excrete more. Okay, but more aldosterone, like I said, opens up channels on the walls of the renal tubules. More salt escapes and it is reabsorbed back to the body, and then less salt is lost. Okay, so when we reabsorb more, we lose less salt in the form of urine. When we reabsorb less salt, more salt will be lost as urine. So the function of aldosterone is to open up channels so that salt is reabsorbed back to the blood or back to the body. So that's why we say aldosterone increases permeability of salt, thereby increasing reabsorption of salt. Okay, let's look at the contextual answer to and a question. When there are low levels of salt or low levels of sodium in the blood, low levels. Let's think about it. Low levels of salt. So out here, the body, there are low levels of salt. It means salt levels from normal, they dropped below normal. What must we do to increase the salt levels back to normal? Think about it. Do we lose more salt in the form of urine, or do we reabsorb more salt? When there are low levels of salt in the body, we can't afford to lose or excrete more salt, okay? We must reabsorb more. So to reabsorb more salt, we need for the walls of the nephron or the walls of the renal tubules to be more permeable so that more salt can be reabsorbed back. Okay. So that more salt can be reabsorbed back. Okay, guys? So, how are you going to put it? When there are low salt or sodium levels in the blood, the receptor cells in the kidney detect the low salt levels. The adrenal glands are stimulated and more aldosterone is secreted. So when we have, remember, please do not say aldosterone is secreted. You must say more aldosterone is secreted. When more aldosterone is secreted, remember what is the function of aldosterone is to make the walls of the renal tubules to be more permeable to salt. So when more aldosterone is secreted, aldosterone causes the walls of the renal tubules to become more permeable. Don't just say more permeable. Please say more permeable to salt. More permeable to salt. Okay? More salt is reabsorbed back to the body, or you can say back to the blood. Really doesn't matter. And when more salt is reabsorbed back to the body, less salt is lost or excreted in urine. This one is just an add-on, and urine is less concentrated. Why do we say urine is less concentrated? Remember, more salt escaped back to the body due to the permeability of the walls of the renal tubule. So when more salt was reabsorbed, we have less salt in urine. That's why we mean the urine is less concentrated. But what about a situation where we have high salt levels? Okay, when we have high salt levels, meaning salt levels increase above normal. How do we get the salt levels to decrease in the body, to decrease back to normal? So, the body already has too much salt. So we don't want to reabsorb more. We want to get rid, we want to excrete more salt. Therefore, receptor cells in the kidney detect the high salt levels. The adrenal glands are stimulated and less aldosterone is secreted. When we have less aldosterone secreted, less aldosterone causes the walls of the renal tubules to become less permeable to salt. Okay? So these channels will be closed now. These channels will be closed. Okay? So there is less permeability. There are less channels or ways that the salt can escape the nephron and go back to the body. And then less salt is reabsorbed back to the body or back to the blood. More salt is lost in urine, and urine becomes more concentrated. Okay, guys? Schematic representation. Schematic representation. Let's just remember the golden rule here. Let's just remember the golden rule. We must check, when we're looking at homeostasis, we must check the following. 1, detection. What detects the change, or which part of the body detects the change? 2, reaction. What will that part react by doing? Normally secreting a hormone. 3, you must describe the function of the hormone. And then lastly, the end result. The result or the conclusion. What's going to happen? Conclusion. Okay. Now, let's check. We have normal salt levels. When the salt levels increase above normal, remember, we must firstly describe what detects. Okay? And then we said the detection is done by the cells of the kidney. Okay? And then, secondly, the reaction. The adrenal gland reacts by secreting more aldosterone. So that is the detection. The reaction. When salt levels increase above normal, the cells in the kidneys will do the detection, and then the adrenal gland will secrete more aldosterone. That's the reaction. What is the function of the aldosterone? Walls of the renal tubules of the nephron become more permeable to salt. So the function of aldosterone is to make the walls of the renal tubules to be more permeable to salt. Okay. Now, when permeability of the renal tubules is increased by aldosterone, there will be more reabsorption of salt back to the body. Okay. Now, when there's more reabsorption of salt back to the body, then the salt levels will decrease. But when they decrease back to normal. Okay. Let us do the inverse. Again, golden rule, detection, detect, to reaction, 3, function, of hormone, and lastly, the result. The end result or conclusion. This is how you must describe your homeostasis or negative feedback. Okay, let's check. Starting from normal salt levels. When the salt levels decrease below normal, what is going to detect? Remember, we said it's the receptor cells of the kidneys. Okay? How do they react? Okay? What reacts? The adrenal gland will secrete less aldosterone. That is the reaction. Okay? So when there's less aldosterone, there will be less of its function, meaning the walls of the renal tubules will be less permeable to salt. When they are less permeable to salt, it means less salt is reabsorbed back to the body. And then what is going to be the conclusion or the end result? Then the salt levels will increase. When they increase back to normal. Okay, guys, let's move on and look at how water is regulated or how water is controlled by the same structure, which is the nephron. Now, water is regulated by a different hormone. Okay, water levels are regulated by ADH, and ADH is not secreted by the adrenal gland. It is secreted by the pituitary gland. Remember, guys, very important, ADH is made in the hypothalamus, but upon release, it is released or secreted by the pituitary gland. You may get this as a trick question in the exam. The manufacturing of ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, is manufactured or made in the hypothalamus, but upon release or secretion, it is secreted by the pituitary gland. So be very, very, very careful. Examiners are very smart when they're asking this question. Okay, let's check. Back to the nephron. Okay, so we said that here water levels are controlled or regulated by ADH. Now, ADH does exactly what aldosterone does to salt levels. But here, ADH makes the walls of the nephron permeable to H2O. So ADH makes the walls of the nephron or opens up channels on the walls of the renal tubules for H2O to escape and be reabsorbed back to the body. So there will be increased permeability of the renal tubules to water, not salt, guys, to water. Okay, now as the blood plasma or the filtrate moves down the nephron, when there is more ADH, then the walls of the renal tubules will be more permeable to water, and more water will be reabsorbed, guys. Reabsorbed. Sorry for that, guys. So, more ADH, more permeability of water, not salt, and you must mention of water. So, as the blood plasma or filtrate is moving, more water will be reabsorbed back to the body or back to the blood, and then less water will reach the collecting duct, okay? And in the urine that is made there, in the collecting duct, the urine will contain less water and it will be urinated out. Okay? But if we have less ADH, these channels will be closed. Okay? These channels will be closed, meaning as the filtrate or the blood plasma is moving like that, less water will be reabsorbed and more water will reach the collecting duct over there. And then more water will be incorporated into urine, and you will urinate more water out. Okay, so just a reminder again, more ADH equals more permeability to water. And then if we have more permeability to water, then more H2O, more water is reabsorbed. Okay, more ADH, more permeability, more reabsorption. Okay, and if we reabsorb more water, we urinate less. Less water will be reabsorbed. I repeat, more ADH, more permeability to water, more reabsorption, and less urination of water. The inverse of that, less ADH equals less permeability to water, which will equal less reabsorption. And when we reabsorb less water, we urinate more, we lose more. Less ADH, less permeability to water, less reabsorption, more urination. Okay, now let us describe, just like ADH, there's just a difference in hormone and a difference in a substance and a difference in a gland. Due to dehydration or due to exercise or due to sweating, all of these three instances makes you lose water in the blood or in the body. Okay, so when we have less water in our bodies, we can't afford to lose water through urination. Okay, meaning we must reabsorb more water. Osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus are stimulated. So what does the detection is osmoreceptors. This is a center that detects the change in the water levels, and they are found in the hypothalamus. They are stimulated, an impulse is sent to the pituitary gland, and more ADH is secreted. Please don't say don't say ADH is secreted, say more ADH is secreted. When there's more ADH, remember the rule, more permeability. ADH causes the walls of the renal tubules to be more permeable to water. Don't just say more permeable. Remember, you must be specific of the substance. More permeable to water. More water is reabsorbed. More water is reabsorbed back to the body. Less water is lost in urine. Less urine is produced. So if there's less water that reaches there, the collecting duct, less water there. Why? Because more water is reabsorbed. And the urine is more concentrated. Because we have less water there, it means we have more solutes or dissolved substances in the urine. Okay? When the person has too much water in their bodies or too much water in their blood, what's going to happen? Again, osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus are stimulated. They will pick up that the blood contains too much water. An impulse is sent to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland will secrete less ADH. Less ADH causes the walls of the renal tubules to become less permeable to water. Less water is reabsorbed back to the body, and more water is lost in urine. Then more urine is produced, and that urine that is produced will be less concentrated. Okay, guys? Let us look at the schematic representation in the following slide. Okay, just a reminder. 1, if you're asked for homeostatic control of any substance, you must provide the following. Okay, what will detect the imbalance? Okay, how will it react? Reaction. Usually, reaction is by secreting a hormone. And then, what is the function of the hormone? And then you must describe what will be the end result or the conclusion. Okay, so we are starting from normal water levels. When the water levels increase above normal, we said that osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus will detect the change. And then what will react? The pituitary gland will secrete more ADH. Remember the golden rule? More ADH equals more permeability. So the walls of the renal tubules of the nephron become more permeable to water. That is the reaction. That is the function of ADH. And then more water is reabsorbed back to the body. And then the water levels decrease back to normal. That is the end result. What if the situation is the opposite? If the situation is the opposite, water levels decrease below normal. Again, you must describe the following to get full marks. What is going to detect this decrease. Secondly, you must describe the reaction. How will the body react? Thirdly, you must describe the function of the hormone that will be secreted. And then lastly, you must describe the end result. Okay, you must describe the end result or the conclusion. Let's check. When there's a drop in water levels below normal, what will detect? The osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, and then the pituitary gland will react by secreting less ADH. And then remember the golden rule: when there's less ADH, there is less permeability. The walls of the renal tubules become less permeable to water. Don't just say less permeable. Less permeable to what? Less permeable to water. And then less water is reabsorbed back to the body. And then the end result is that the water levels will increase, but they increase back to normal. Okay, guys? All right. Now, I will be concluding this lesson here and now. The next video will be exam type questions, based on the content of lesson 5. Okay, because this video is long enough. I will see you in that video. Goodbye.